Happy Australia Day. In fact, it's a much happier Australia Day than I can recall in years, because to my astonishment, it seemed from today that the haters are now losing. Australians are getting absolutely sick of all these attacks on Australia Day and the country that we're meant to celebrate. Sick of the lies and the division and the sheer ingratitude for this brilliant country. Let me show you. Melbourne, where the socialist left government scrapped the annual Australia Day parade some time ago. That, of course, left the streets to the haters for the Invasion Day protests instead, which 8 years ago looked like this, absolutely massive, but which today looked like this, rather pathetic. In Sydney, the crowds also seemed down, even though pro-Palestinian protesters with their flags boosted the numbers. That was sure an alliance of anti-Australia haters. Protest organiser Elizabeth Jarrett tried to brush that off.
There is no international issue. The international issue right now is Australia being against First Nations people. Let's not get it wrong. The pro-Palestinian protesters, as long as they're here with us and they're doing the right thing, they're more than welcome.
Add to that, a couple of surveys last week that said, yes, there's been a big swing of support to keeping Australia Day on January 26. In fact, the Resolve poll said even most young voters now didn't want that changed. Now, I think, this recent explosion of Jew hatred and all those rabid anti-Israel marches and pro-Hamas protesters over the past 2 years, that's shocked a lot of people. Made them think that we're being divided like never before. That we're all really the target of this hatred, and that Australia is under attack from people united by that hatred. The Marxists, the radical Aboriginal separatists, Islamist preachers, anarchists, and more. And even today, just carrying or wearing an Australian flag near these anti-Australia Day protesters, that was too dangerous for police to allow, as our reporter Georgie Dickinson tried to report while being shouted over by protesters.
We've just got a little bit of movement here from police. We've seen two ladies wearing Australia Day hats as well as Australia Day flags ushered away from police.
Think of that. It is too dangerous to have an Australian flag on Australia Day in the middle of Melbourne. And if you do have a flag, police remove you and not the threat. Same as Sydney, where riot police tackled a young man with an Australian flag near those Invasion Day protesters. Here's reporter Crystal Wu.
We saw a group of riot squad officers running towards the front of the protest. It turns out it was a ute displaying an Australian flag. From our understanding, we don't believe the ute was acting in any way, but riot squad officers were quick to act.
Now, it really did seem that these anti-Australia protesters, they were just it was just a group hate session for every activist who's got some kind of grudge against this country and needing the company of fellow haters to feel they're sticking it to the man on Australia Day. Crystal Wu actually had trouble keeping up with them all.
Among the Aboriginal flags, we're also seeing Palestinian flags. There are people from all walks of life protesting today against many factors, some calling on international issues, and others just protesting here because they want to spend the day with people who share the same values.
Really, I think that many Australians are now totally jack of this nonsense. They realise haters like that, they just want to hate, What do you hate? What do you got? And there's no reasoning with them. There's certainly no reasoning with one of the organisers of Melbourne's Invasion Day rally, who in that bigger Invasion Day rally 8 years ago that I showed you, told us Australia should burn to the ground.
We've organised this to abolish Australia Day because Australia. Burns to the ground.
And today, that same woman from the so-called warriors of the Aboriginal resistance was still preaching hatred, which she justified with poisonous untruths about Australia in interview after interview.
Today we've gathered for the freedom of our people, for self-determination, and we're calling on a national day of mourning on the 26th of January. This day is a day that we
as First Nations people have been calling for the last 88 years. The first protest was in 1938, and we are calling for a National Day of Mourning today, and for that to be recognised as First Nations people so that we can come together and grieve the loss of the massacres and the genocide.
So since 1991, 617 Indigenous people have been killed in either police custody or in prisons.
I've got to fact check these people. 1, Aborigines are free as everyone else in Australia, which is one of the freest societies in history, which is worth celebrating. 2, there was no genocide, obviously, when we have nearly 1 million people now claiming to be Aboriginal. And 3, the claim that hundreds of Aborigines have been killed in jail, presumably by police, is simply a lie. You check the latest report by the Australian Institute of Criminology. In fact, Aboriginal protesters are less likely to die in jail than are non-Aboriginal prisoners, as a proportion of their prison population. Those who do die either from suicide or health reasons, and no police officer or warden has in years been found guilty or credibly accused of murdering them in custody. But now, even imported haters are joining forces to spread such falsehoods. Ahmed Ouf came here from Egypt 16 years ago and is now a councillor in Cumberland City. Now, you might expect him, therefore, to show some gratitude to this country. But Ouf, who's been backed by the Muslim Vote organisation, had this message of hate for Australia Day, claiming that Aboriginal society, which, by the way, was actually often brutal and bloody, was pretty good until wicked whites came.
These were stable societies that lived for tens of thousands of years. What followed was catastrophic massacres, genocide, forced removals, ethnic cleansing, introduced disease, the destruction of land, food systems, families and culture. This isn't about asking you to apologize for something you didn't do. It's about telling the truth.
Wonder why he felt it necessary to move to this terrible country he describes. But again, there was no genocide, there was no ethnic cleansing, and I've often shown here how the stolen generations was grotesquely exaggerated. Nor have our land and food systems been destroyed. In fact, we grow so much food now that starvation is unknown here. And we even help feed the world. If only our political class and cultural institutions fought back against the falsehoods of such haters and against this tribalism and division. Instead, we saw again at the National Citizenship Ceremony in Canberra how the Australian flag was brought out only after the 2 tribal flags were brought. The ones that the government also flies these days, and how the guests had to be welcomed to their own country by a woman identifying as Aboriginal who clearly had a lot of European ancestry as well. Meanwhile, the ABC simply feeds the hate. The national broadcaster marked this Australia Day by running a special last Wednesday, hosted by ex-AFL footballer Tony Armstrong, telling Australians not to celebrate.
I'm sure you're expecting me to use this moment to do a big viral speech about what January 26th means and why you, the good white people watching, ought to feel real sad. But the problem is, you already know. You've heard it before, you know it's wrong. Don't be a dog.
So if you celebrated, then you're a dog. The ABC says so. And Armstrong also did a mock cooking segment that spread the most obscene and divisive atrocity stories about the first British settlers.
The secret is seasoning. This spice mix has a hint of lemon myrtle in it. Flip the meat so that it's coated on both sides. Just as some historians believe the gifts distributed by soldiers given to Aboriginal people at Manly Cove were coated in smallpox. Unless, as some experts have argued, it was deliberately introduced to decimate a population who colonists have described as primitive and barbaric, which would have been a deliberate use of biological warfare, leading to a genocide.
Again, false. Another fact check. The last time the ABC pushed that nonsense, 16 years ago, real experts, like a medical expert from Sydney University, told it, we don't even know if this outbreak was smallpox or, say, chickenpox. Nor was it likely that soldiers deliberately infected Aborigines with smallpox that was brought in vials from Britain more than a year earlier, because the virus usually dies in ambient temperature within 2 months. No one actually does know what happened. was, whatever virus that was, spread instead by Malaccan fishermen or French explorers. Yet the ABC decided that pushing this toxic garbage was the way it wanted to mark Australia Day. But I think Australians are now saying enough, or at least more of them are. No one is saying our history was perfect and without pain, but Australia Day does mark the day when we had to start learning to live with each other, whatever our race and ethnicity. And when you see what a miracle we've made of it, well, that sure is worth celebrating. And as for the haters, we see through you.